Hello, I have just finished reading this book, The 10 Types of Humans, Who We Are and Who We Can Be, by Dexter Diaz. I may be saying that incorrectly. He's a QC, he's a barrister, he's spent 10 years, more than 10 years, um, traveling to places all over the world and meeting people in the most incredible situations. People in war-torn countries, people who are victims of acid attacks, people who have locked-in syndrome, which is essentially complete paralysis, but their minds are still functioning perfectly. That all sounds very depressing, but it's actually a very uplifting book. Now, the 10 types of humans, what he does is he's come up with 10 modules, he calls them, which everybody can turn on, everybody can be. So you've got things like the aggressor, and for that, there are stories from places like Central African Republic, where unless you already know, uh, there's a there's a civil war going on, has been for ages. The advice is generally not to go there. Haiti, where 10 years ago, almost a day, there was an earthquake that killed 300,000 people and reduced it to what he calls year zero. There was nothing, and very, very rapidly, different tribes formed. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, and he speaks to people who are in that situation. And all these stories, the stories themselves, I mean, if this was just a book of those stories, real people, it would be absolutely fascinating, and emotionally quite difficult to read sometimes. You're hearing about people who are bereaved, people who, like I said, have been victim of terrible crimes, people from war zones. There was a story about a boy he meets who was sold into slavery by his parents, and that story was used to illustrate a few of the different modules. The parents, when I just say sold into slavery by his parents, it sounds absolutely terrible. But these parents have children they can't feed unless they sell one of their children. He also comes up with hypotheticals such as you're walking down a corridor in a school, there's a gunman. If you turn left, you can save 20 children, but your daughter is in a corridor is in a cupboard at the end of the corridor. If you save her, the 20 children die. Um, it really gets your mind working, really gets you thinking. Some of the stories will keep you up at night, and the way he weaves, the scientific findings, because there are obviously, I say obviously, there are studies in here from university studies, psychological studies, uh, studies on neuroanatomy, the activities in the brain, what is going on in the brain when people are engaging in certain types of behavior. Because what he wanted to see was whether for each module, so one of them I mentioned is the aggressor, there's the perceiver of pain, there's the tamer of terror. What is going on in the brain? Is there a brain center? Is there a part of the brain that's associated with each of these modules? So if there is, it suggests that it's hardwired into our system. It's been hardwired by evolution or by something else. There's a lot of talk of evolutionary theory. It's the best book I've read in a year. I will say it's the best book I've read in a year. It's 800 pages long nearly, and there'll be a bit of science, and then there'll be results of the study, and then there'll be a conversation he's had. Then he'll be flying out to, you know, Sudan or something. Um, I'm not even sure if Sudan features in the book. It just popped into my mind. But he'll be flying out to somewhere, maybe Haiti, and he's meeting somebody, and he tells their story. And then a couple of years later, he meets them again. It's all these different narratives woven into each other. And sometimes that's frustrating because you'll be reading a chapter and it gets to a cliffhanger, and maybe it's about a character. There's a character in here called Anna, and you think, oh, what happens next? And then you don't come back to her until 50, 60, 100 pages later. But it is brilliant. I would say it's unputdownable, but I didn't read a 800 page book in one sitting. Of course I didn't. But it's something. This is one of those books that you read it, and everybody speak to you, say to them, you've got to read this book. It's incredible. Um, I said that to my brother, and he said, "What's it about?" I said, "Different types of people," and he corrected me. He said, "You mean a taxonomy?" Yeah. So it's like a taxonomy. Um, Something very, very fascinating from here. I mean, there's a lot of history in here which I didn't know as well, and history which is significant. Yeah, there are now, today, more slaves in the world than at any time throughout history. Shocking. But these are people sold into, child slavery, sexual exploitation, human trafficking. That there's a fascinating story and very sad story because these stories are taken from real life, so they don't all have happy endings. there are some happy endings, if you can call them that, in the book. For example, racism does not appear to be hardwired into our brains. It's something that can be overcome when other categories are made more pertinent. So, let's say if you've got racism, let's take the old classic, you've got white people and you've got black people. And the black people generally will be victims of racism, as can the white people, but generally it's the black people. But if they're playing for your favorite team, then the team is the most important category, and it's the other team who are the this and the that, and everything's their fault. And I don't have a, this or that because of them, not because of the wrong coloured people, the people from the wrong country, but the people who aren't on my team. So that's fantastic. It suggests that you can overcome racism. It's not hardwired into our brain. I could go on for ages. I think I've gone on for long enough. 700 and something, 800 pages of incredible reading. The guy can really write. Highly recommended. 10 out of 10. 10 types of humans, who we are and who we can be. Go and read it. Go and read it. It starts off with him recounting a case he was working on of a 14-year-old boy in a juvenile detention center, I guess they call them, I don't know, who he never met. He just saw CCTV video of him walking to his cell. 3 officers then walked to his cell, and a few minutes later the boy is dead. Out of that case came the questions that led to him writing this book, and once you read it, you'll be glad he did, because it's incredible. Highly recommended. Like I said, go out and read it.